Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name is Amanda Potter. I am the Curator of Education at the Zimmerli Art Museum, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this evening's event, The Moral Responsibility of the Artist. We are really delighted to partner with a number of organizations that we deeply admire. This is the fourth year of Windows of Understanding. Every year in the past, we've been able to host either a welcome or closing reception for this wonderful initiative at the museum, and we were really delighted that we were able to partner virtually as well. I also want to thank Mason Gross School of the Arts at Rutgers and Rutgers Global for their cooperation and support of this evening as well. If this is your first time attending a Zimmerli Art Museum event, I hope we'll see you many times. We're really trying to do a lot to stay connected with our community during these virtual times. So I'll invite you to visit our Zimmerli at Home site, which I'll put in the chat momentarily. If you have questions for our panelists today, please use the Q&A function. If you have any technical issues, you can contact us in the chat as well. We are recording this program. We will be sharing it on the Zimmerli and Mason Gross sites in the coming days as well. So I'm going to turn things over right now to Marc Handelman, who is the Chair of Art and Design at Mason Gross, to moderate this evening's program. Take it away, Marc, and thank you.
Hi, Amanda. Thanks so much. Hi, everybody. I want to welcome you to tonight's event. I'm so thrilled that you're able to join us and spend the evening with us. I'm really excited. So my name is Marc Handelman. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a painter and a visual artist living and working in Brooklyn, New York. And as Amanda said, I currently serve as chair of the Department of Art and Design at Mason Gross School of the Arts at Rutgers. And I'm really thrilled and honored to serve as the moderator and co-organizer for this event. And I want to thank Amanda Potter from the Zimmerli, and also Cassandra Oliveros Moreno, my colleague from our department, and also who organizes the Windows of Understanding project for both envisioning this talk and also co-organizing things. So let me first introduce our really wonderful panelists this evening. So, thank you for taking the time to be here and to think through this amazing talk by James Baldwin with us. First is Frederick Curry, who's an associate professor. Hey, Frederick. Associate professor of professional practice and director of the Rutgers Graduate Program in Dance Education, a partnership between Mason Gross Department of Dance and the Rutgers Graduate School of Education. The EDM, Dance Education Program, is part of the Graduate School of Education's Urban Social Justice Teacher Preparation Program, which aims to prepare teacher candidates to effectively work with diverse learners by fostering a deep understanding of students from historically marginalized linguistic, economic, and cultural backgrounds and communities. Heather Hart. Hi, Heather. Heather is based in Brooklyn. She's an interdisciplinary artist exploring the power and thresholds, questioning dominant narratives, and creating alternatives to them through viewer activation. She was awarded grants from Anonymous Was a Woman, the Graham Foundation, Joan Mitchell Foundation, and the Jerome Foundation, among others. Hart co-founded Black Lunch Table in 2005 and has won a Creative Capital Award and an Andy Warhol Foundation of Art grant and others to support this project. Her work has been exhibited at venues that include the Queen's Museum, Storm King Arts Center, the Brooklyn Museum, and the University of Toronto, among many others. And Hart is a visiting lecturer in sculpture in our department in art and design. She also worked at Davidson Gallery in New York. And Hart studied at Skowhegan, the Whitney ISP, Cornish College of the Arts, and Princeton University. And Heather received her MFA from Rutgers, so we're so excited that Heather is back with us. Since 2002, Marshall Jones, hi Marshall, has helmed the BA program, the BA theater program at Rutgers. He has more than 35 years of experience in many aspects of professional theater, including producing, directing, and writing. Marshall has held executive positions at some of New York City's most celebrated artistic institutions, such as the Apollo Theater, Madison Square Garden, Radio City Music Hall, and Disney's The Lion King. For 13 years, he served as the producing artistic director of the Tony Award-winning Crossroads Theater Company. He eagerly looks forward to the next chapter of his career, pursuing independent directing, as well as guiding his production company in the post-pandemic world. And our last and fourth finalists, Paterson, New Jersey raised painter Jo-El Lopez uses the visual storytelling of traditional realism to convey complex commentary on the intersection of faith and modernity, the strength of family, and the multidimensional contemporary urban experience. The decades the artist spent under the Pentecostal doctrine, a bold color palette informed by both abstract painting as well as older traditions of icon making, all meld to create Lopez's kaleidoscopic worldview. His collection of artworks reveals a restless, deeply engaged spirit, closely observing not only his immediate environment, but the larger historical trajectory of national news and events. And when we all return from this pandemic moment, the Zimmerli has acquired a wonderful Jo-El Lopez piece. So I hope you can make it over to the Zimmerli and check it out when we're on the other side of this. So we'll start tonight's event in a little bit with a listening and reading session of James Baldwin's The Moral Responsibility of the Artist. This was a speech, it was a talk that was delivered in May 21, 1963 at the University of Chicago. And then we'll hear some brief reflections from our panelists. I'll pose some questions, we'll have an intimate conversation, and then we can take questions and reflections from the audience. I want to briefly say a few words about the Windows of Understanding. The project was conceived and catalyzed 4 years ago in response to the white supremacist rally and attacks in Charlottesville, which we all remember. Each year, the Windows of Understanding project brings together Mason Gross students and local artists with local businesses and community and social justice oriented nonprofits to create original public artworks and host conversations, much like this one, around a host of critical social issues. It is presented by the New Brunswick Community Arts Council, Mason Gross School of the Arts at Rutgers, the Highland Park Arts Commission, and this year Metuchen Arts Council joins as a partner. This year, the project is focused on issues of climate change, food insecurity, healing from trauma, public health, and youth engagement. And a satellite exhibition dedicated to racial justice just launched and opened in partnership with the American Hungarian Foundation, which if you're in New Brunswick is just down the street from Rutgers, from downtown. And Cassandra should be dropping in a link in the chat to both virtual galleries and to other events and things that are happening through Windows of Understanding. And I'm just so pleased that tonight's event is part of this vibrant programming and is shared and co-sponsored by the Zimmerli Museum. So James Baldwin likely does not need an introduction, but to offer some of the most peripheral outlines, Baldwin remains one of our most incisive, piercing, and honest messengers. He was an artist, a poet, a novelist, playwright, a journalist, essayist, an artistic muse, and an activist of civil rights and racial justice. And he embodied and represented a Black queer voice within the movement and in his time at further risk and often with exclusionary consequences. Baldwin was the movement's most influential literary voice, and his insights into the entanglement and nuances of racial, sexual, political, psychical realities, threaded as they are within social life, are by turns brutally diagnostic, generatively implicating, and also prophetic. The question of the moral responsibility of the artist is always timely, and it's been posed in every generation and cultural epoch. But Baldwin's voice and wisdom resonates especially so today as we confront our past and ongoing present in this profound moment of racial reckoning. And it is a process of doing this against and within the bulwark of emboldened forces of white supremacy, allied and reinfused with mythologies, new and old, dizzying conspiracy theories and willful violence. Baldwin once stated, "It is certain in any case that ignorance, allied with power, is the most ferocious enemy justice can have." And some 67 years later, the poignancy of this statement seems to collapse time. Its indictment pierces the present, wounding us with our failure to heed its warning that somehow art is bound up in all this, that art, and by extension, the artist, has some bearing, some effect, some agency in one another's life and in the world, that it is impossible to be neutral, or at least impossible to act so if one seeks to be truly, fully human, is what Baldwin's meditation and question challenges us to both grapple with and for. So with that, I'm really looking forward to listening again and reading along with this talk into our conversation afterwards. For those of you who want to read along, we produced a transcript, and I think Cassandra is going to drop that in the chat now. I'll let you, I'll give you a sec to pull that up. And in full disclosure, just please note that Baldwin pointedly and critically articulates a racial expletive later on in the talk. So real quick too, the talk is about 40 minutes. It's a little under 40 minutes. So just so you have a sense of time. So thank you. And I will see you when we start our conversation.
Thank you, and good evening. And I'm very glad to be here. And can you all hear me? Now, if you can't hear me, you got to let me know. Now, I've been given a kind of topic, which I don't mean to criticize anybody. I agreed on the topic. And what I'm supposed to be talking to you about this evening is the moral, which one can also read social, responsibility of the artist. Now this is, once one begins to think about it, so loaded a theme, so loaded a subject, that no one can hope to do it justice. And all that I can hope to do this evening is to speculate with you and then have you speculate with me. I will try to ask you some questions, and then you will try to ask me some questions, and then we'll see what happens. Now, the trouble with such things as the moral responsibility of the artist, which is a very grandiose way of putting it, is that in order to begin to deal with such a subject at all, one's got to begin by being extremely reckless and extremely simple-minded. For example, before we can begin to discuss it, one's got to arrive at some kind of tentative agreement as to what or who an artist is. And that would seem a very simple matter if it were not for two facts, which I suggest to you. At least two facts. And especially in this country and at this time. One is that one has got to disengage the artistic effort. One has got to separate it from what is normally thought of in this country, and perhaps in the world, when we speak of self-expression. And to give you some idea of how loaded the subject is, the very conjunction of the two words self-expression opens up a tremendous wilderness. Who is this self, and what is it expressing? But to stick to my point, the artistic effort is first of all defined by the necessity, by the the discipline is that one has got to become disinterested. That is to say, I may have excellent reasons, private, emotional terrors. For some reason, I may not want to think that this is wood. But in order to become an artist, I got to say that this is wood, even if it threatens my life, and even if I know it will destroy me. Now, the reason, we're going to come back to that in a minute, this effort at being disinterested, which is the bone of the artistic discipline. But the second reason is in some ways even more important, and is certainly connected to the first reason, which is the fact. Now bear in mind when I say fact, that for example, this is a fact, I am a fact, all of you are collective and individual facts, and the city in which we stand and the country in which we find ourselves are facts, like rain, like thunder, like lightning, like fire. The fact of the artist has always attacked, and it attacks now. And as far as we can tell, it probably always will attack all of our notions of safety and all of our notions of health. Now speaking, if I may, for a moment, simply as an artist who tries to work with words, any literary artist soon realizes that all words are at least double-edged. There is, for example, such a thing as health, and there really is such a thing as health. But there is also such a thing as what society thinks of as health, which is not the same thing. Now, when you are trying to suggest, for example, what health is, you are forced to attack all the assumptions of your society, because it imagines health to be collective, whereas the artist is forced to recognize and is obliged to make you know that health is single, individual, and uncertain. There's never a moment in anybody's life when the job is, as it were, done. You may make it on Tuesday, but you still got Wednesday morning to face. Now the reason that traditionally, this is according to me, presently as I said, you'll have a chance at, you can attack me. But legend is full of legends, of stories about the dreamy poet, the mad lover, the poet, the lunatic, and the lover. Marvelous conjunction. Traditionally and classically, the artist is always possessed. Traditionally and classically, he has always been stoned, and there are many ways of stoning an artist to death, by the people who produced him because they needed him. Now, what was he possessed by? This is where we get into the extraordinary marshy ground of who and what an artist is. Now, according to me, what an artist is, who an artist is simply somebody who helps you see reality again. The pressures of everyone's life, including, if I may say so, those of the artist, are so great that one has, in self-defense, in order to survive, in order to get through one single day, to learn certain habits, to take certain things for granted, with the effect, inevitably, that by and by, you don't see anything. Now let me repeat that. I've had to assume, for example, I have to take for granted that this platform will not fall down beneath me. I must take that for granted. I assume that this building is built strongly enough that the ceiling won't fall down on me. Now, these are assumptions which may or may not be justified. But I must make these assumptions in order to move at all. On the other hand, in order to keep alive, in order to become a human being really, one has got to question everything. Let me try to give you an example of what I mean. Apples are very common. When a writer tries to describe an apple, nothing would seem simpler than to say an apple's red, for example. But then you realize the word apple has certain emotional, historical, classical connotations. It is somehow involved with evil, Eve in the garden. It is a fact, no, it grows on a tree, it falls. And how do you make an apple real on a page? How do I make you see what an apple is? Or, for example, another example. We've all, I suppose, in one way or another, had occasion to deal with a newborn child. And legend is full of the miracle of motherhood and fatherhood. And indeed it is a miracle when a child comes into the world. But it's a miracle very little respected. Finally, that moment of wonder, which is precisely what we all depend on when the child is born, is what we endlessly betray in the raising of the child. So again, one has to make real, the artist has to make real for himself and everyone else the fact of the birth of a child is holy, and we are responsible to that moment, which is one of the summits of everybody's life. Now, the vision by which an artist is possessed, and here we can use the word possessed, I think, legitimately, because no one in his right mind, I assure you, would want to be a writer. I never understood people who say they would like to be writers. I discovered that I was one, and I'm still trying to make it. He is possessed, the artist is possessed by a vision which is precisely this, nothing less than this. It is the vision of the New Jerusalem. It is the vision of the kingdom of heaven on earth. And where the war begins between the artist and the society is precisely here. It is only the artist, as distinguished from the priest, the psychoanalyst, the Pope. It is only the artist who is really, you can check me out, I hope, given us any sense of what it is like to be alive, to be trapped, and to glory in this fact that one is forever, or for a very short time, I mean both things at once, between that sky and this earth, and you came from someplace, and you're going someplace else, you don't know where you're going, and you don't know where you came from, and what it feels like to be here and to triumph in it. The artist has given us his record, and the war is a very strange war when you begin to realize that the reason the artist is possessed by the vision of the New Jerusalem is not at all because he is a dreamer, and not at all because he is unrealistic. his vision is based on what he has seen of human beings, what one sees of them, what one sees of another, proves that people can be better than they are. This is all any artist has ever been trying to say. And the collision occurs because people would like to be better than they are, but don't wish to see themselves revealed, and don't wish to have their deepest intimations, their deepest suspicions concerning what they could be and what they could do. They do not wish to have these suspicions confirmed because the effort is mighty. One of the reasons that we have invented God is simply on the most basic and also the most base and the most tribal level to justify our failures. God expands as we expand. I don't think I had to spell out to any of you the fearful crimes which have been committed and are being committed all over the world and in this country as we stand here in the name of God. Now the artist, no matter how he sounds, is by definition a religious man, believing that we can create and transcend all our gods. That it is entirely up to us. It is the work of human beings to make the world more human. This is the demand that the artist makes of his society, which the society inevitably, unfailingly, and always resists. Resists because it knows that it could do it, but prefers to believe that what it can see and touch is more real than what it knows and feels at that moment, for example, when the baby is born. The role of the artist, the responsibility of the artist, is to make you respect that moment above all other moments. To recognize that there is nothing under heaven, nothing under heaven, no creed and no flag and no cause more important than the single human life. Now, perhaps I should try to spell it out a little bit more. I don't want to sound in any way too general. But for example, and I'm sure this has happened to everyone in this room in one way or another, I'm a street boy, and I've known some terrible, terrible people. You know, racketeers, whores, gangsters, and people much worse than that, and so have you. And yet, in all these people, and it wasn't always easy to reach. Sometimes it was impossible to reach. Sometimes when we recognized it negatively, because the cat or the chick cursed you out in a certain way. In all these people, if one struck a certain nerve, a certain moment, something happened. And what happened for a moment was that they realized, they accepted, and they rejoiced in the fact that they were human and that they were alive. We've all seen this. It is one of the reasons that no one has the right to stand in moral judgment on the life of another, because you don't know what you would have done if you'd gone that road. This is a very important matter in this country now, especially in this country now, because we have been, it seems to me, for so many generations, so misled and even so maligned. For example, it has simply never been true that the country was settled by heroes and martyrs. That simply is not true. It has never been true that we were a happy people. In San Francisco, where I was the other day, where they have thousands of successful people who have the highest suicide rate in the world. What is true is that, in fact, the country was settled as all things are done, as all human things are achieved, you know, awkwardly, with pain, with sweat, and with vast injustice, by a handful of people from Europe who had reasons of their own for leaving Europe. And the reason for leaving Europe was not because they wanted to be free. They had other reasons. And this sounds, I suppose, very hostile. But something awful happens to a people if they make of their history a myth. The Irish came here, for example, because they were starving. That's why. There may be one or two Irishmen, or three or four Irishmen, or whatever, came for some other more noble reason. But in fact, the country was settled by people who had excellent reasons for living where they were. And where they were was worse than where they found themselves. And when they closed the door on the European past, and this is part of the American drama now, they thought they had buried the past. It is why, until today, no American dares look back. The only people who came here for other reasons, who didn't want to come here at all, never dreamed of it, were my ancestors. Now, the weird paradox is this, and I'm still trying to give you some sense, or my sense anyway, of what the moral responsibility of an artist is. It isn't so much, that here we came, I mean the Europeans, the people from heaven. That's what the Indians called them the first time they saw them, and how right they were. The people from heaven came here and killed off the Indians. And they killed off the Indians in very dishonorable ways. By treachery, by lies, by murder. But I'm not complaining, for example, about that. I'm complaining about the fact that one pretends it didn't happen. And we have endless TV shows, as far as I can tell, 7 nights a week to prove it didn't happen. That's the crime. If you don't know where you came from, then you don't know where you are, and you can't find out where you're going. The second thing these freedom-loving people did was enslave the black man because they needed cheap labor. Well, okay. People have been doing that for centuries too. But as far as I can judge from what I read and what I see, this never happened either. Negroes liked it. Until today, until this moment, and I'm not kidding, part of the crisis in the liberal conscience is that somewhere he always assumed that you were grateful for being rescued from Africa and being brought at the point of a rifle to the foot of the cross. Now, what I'm after, you see, since I'm trying now to speak as an artist, I'm compelled, I must know that I'm going to write a sentence. Delusion from something resembling truth. If I had ever accepted the American version of American history, I would be at the bottom of a river. There'd be no other place for me to go. And as long as Americans accept this peculiar version of American history, they are uneasy and lost and lonely in the world. One of the terrible facts of the national life, by which I mean the private life, something, for example, Mr. Faulkner knew. I'm convinced one of the things that killed him is that if the American white man, cannot make friends with me, if the American white man pretends that he's not also my brother and my sister and my ancestor, unless he is willing to accept his only real connection, repeat, his only real connection, he will always be the loneliest man on earth. The Europeans do not understand Americans at all. At all. The only people in the world who do, the only people in the world who understand Americans are what we like to refer to as a darker brother. That's me. And I understand you because I've had to watch you, outwit you. I changed your diapers. I served your brandy. I've known what you were frightened of when you called me nigger. I had to know it if I were going to live. Speaking again, as a man who tries to work with words, and principally as a novelist, when you're at the typewriter and you're trying to create, to make alive, to make vivid a character, the most terrible thing you have to do, the first most terrible thing, is to accept the fact that in some peculiar way this character, whom you may or may not admire, you probably don't admire, came floating up out of you. And this creation testifies to something about you. And your responsibility as a man and as an artist is to face the fact that what you invent says more about you than it can possibly say about anything else. Your responsibility as an artist and as a man is to come as close as possible and the gap is always irreducible, to close the gap between what you see and what there is, which is where we come to the principle again of being disinterested. So that if this were the guillotine and I knew that I was about to perish on it, I would be under the obligation to say, this is the guillotine. But it won't cease being the guillotine if I say it isn't. Now, the people who invented the nigger and who are still wrestling with the nigger and who have arrived at a moral chaos so sinister that in this country, in 1963, we can still see dogs turned on children, hoses turned on children. This is a lapse from reality which could lead us where it led Germany. I want to repeat that. There is such a thing. If you abdicate from your responsibilities as a human being, responsibilities as a human being, and your responsibility as a human being is to treat other people as human beings. If you abdicate from that, there is no end to the labyrinth and the abyss in which you can find yourself. When you are at the typewriter creating somebody, you got to realize, no matter what crimes he committed, that it could be you. And in order to make it vivid, you have to try to examine those motives in yourself of which you are most ashamed and most terrified. Because otherwise, you will not create a character, you will create a point of view. And that is not what fiction is for. What Dostoevsky, for example, was trying to do in The Possessed, which is a novel laid in a very small provincial Russian town, not a very long time ago. What he was trying to do was terrify the people who read the book into realizing the spiritual state of Russia. Of course, in order to do it, he became, as we like to put it, extremely unhealthy. But as it turned out, he was entirely right. What one is trying to do now here is suggest to the American people that there is no reason whatever to be ashamed of the past, and no way whatever in any case to escape it. A field of paradox has happened in this country which no one seems to have noticed. And the paradox, to put it to you this way, is that I, or Duke Ellington, or Ray Charles, or Mahalia Jackson, or my nephew, are far more European than any American white man. And the reason that this is so is simply because black men in this country know what poets since Homer have known, that life is tragic. Life is tragic because the sun rises and the sun sets. The world turns. Everything changes. If you're not prepared to lose everything, then you never will have anything. This is what is meant when somebody sings the blues. it means you can't hold it. But it's nice to have for, for the time you've got it. It's nice to know it's there, even when it isn't yours anymore, because it never is yours. It's life. Conrad said, woe to the man who puts not his trust in life. The Negro in this country represents that level of experience which we find in Oedipus Rex, and which Americans thought they had escaped when they crossed the ocean. And their attempt to escape it, they have become very dangerously adolescent. I'll try to spell that out. For example, there is to my mind something insane in the entire Cuban fiasco. To my mind, there's something insane in not knowing that a Cuban peasant might prefer to just be a Cuban peasant without the aid of the Americans, without working for nobody, working for himself. One has got to know more than that. There's a country called Cuba, it's an island, and the man who lives on it called himself a Cuban, and it was inevitable that sooner or later he would drive us out. What's sinister about that is that we pretend the Kremlin did it. What's sinister about that is that I, speaking now in my own person, think I have some sense of how the Cuban peasant must have felt, because I know how I feel, and I can't think of any reason why I would go down to Cuba to shoot Cubans when we can't make a truce in Birmingham. The country which calls itself the moral leader of the free world will really have to become so. The great hangover here is the doctrine of white supremacy. And that's gotten tangled up in the American viscera with all kinds of other things. There's a terrible connection, for example, between that hangover and all those ghastly movies, Doris Day, proving that love lasts forever and never hurt a soul. Any Negro you've ever seen in your life, still on 2 feet, knows better than that. Now, if we can establish this wedding, or rather, if we can legalize this child, we can begin to grow up. If we can't manage to accept what we have done and what we are doing, we're going to destroy our children. And that'll be the destruction of the country. The values that we live by are not real values. The real values are when a kid trusts you, for example. That's a real value. That means something. You can go a long way on that. But to be a young exec is not a real value. A country which pretends that it is possible to get to be 70 and still be innocent is in great danger. And we elected a boy of 70, not once, but twice. Well, There's a line from Nietzsche I'd like to leave with you. It describes my situation at the moment. I think it describes our situation at the moment. And thus spake Zarathustra. Nietzsche said, I may be not word for word right. This is what he said. He said, I stand before my highest mountain and before my longest journey, and therefore must I descend deeper than I have ever before descended. And that is where we are. What we must descend into is a sea of human experience. We must cease trying to be a collection of virgins and try to bob up into the great light of human responsibility. We did not escape anything when we left Europe. We conquered a continent, and we've yet to make it a country. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I hope everyone could hear that. If not, at least be able to access that transcript. I want to just short apology for any errors in the transcript. I did that myself. I'm not very good at it, and as I've been making edits over the week as I've sort of listened, but I found some more, and so just apologies. I hope that didn't frustrate the listening of that. But anyway, so let's phase into the next part of this evening. We're going to hear from just for a few minutes each. We're going to hear from each of our panelists, reflecting on their practice, just allowing us to know what they're doing and thinking a little bit more. So, and we'll start in alphabetical order, in the same order that I introduced folks. So, Frederick, do you want to jump in?
Sure. Thank you, Mark. Hello, everyone. I'm really excited to be with you this evening. It's always a revelation for me when I get to re-engage with the brilliance of James Baldwin. I'll talk a little bit about how I'm situated in this conversation. As Mark mentioned, I direct a graduate dance education program. So I'm working with graduate students who are on process to becoming dance teachers in K-12 public schools, particularly in New Jersey. And so part of the process in working with them is interrogating their sense of themselves as artists and how that intersects with the frame of K-12 education. So in learning standards, in arts learning standards in K-12 schools, there's a focus on artistic processes, which are creating dances, creating choreography, performing dances, responding to choreographic works, and connecting learning in artistic processes to learning in other content areas in the curriculum. So there is the artistic side of it, and then there's also the identity side of it, working with these teacher candidates so that they understand their identity, positionality in relationship to the students that they will be working with. And New Jersey is one of the most, has one of the most racially diverse student populations in the US. I found out recently that it also has one of the most racially segregated public school systems in the US. So in terms of teacher identity and positionality, helping students to understand what's centered for them in their identity and their sense of themselves, and what the related unearned privilege and implicit bias, whether you're on the giving end or receiving end of bias, understanding how that's connected to intersectional identity for themselves as individuals, and also for the students that they're going to be working with. So I think having conscious awareness of this intersectionality and positionality is really critical, indispensable to creating dance classrooms where diverse students feel seen and heard and affirmed. And many things struck me about this lecture. One thing is that I'm familiar with an essay that James Baldwin wrote. Interestingly, it was published in the same year that he gave this talk, at the end of the year, and it was a talk to teachers, particularly talking about his thoughts about teaching Black children. And in both talks, he really stressed the treatment of children as being the barometer of the country's moral and spiritual health. And hearing this lecture again, it really just imprinted for me that Baldwin had what I'm trying to help my students appreciate, is that he had both an artistic mindset and he had a teacher mindset. So I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. Let's see, Heather.
Hello. Thanks, Mark and Cassandra and Amanda, and for your words, Frederick. I'm captivated by the slippage and a threshold space between truth and fiction, oral histories and written histories, between what I say and what you hear. I focus on the translation between space and the public and my work, and the slippage, construction, and communication that happens between these. I want my interdisciplinary work to act as a translator in a language between architectures and the public eye. My sculptural forms are a participatory exploration of these spaces. Most African Americans are descended from people who have had no physical space of their own when they landed on this continent. We kept an oral tradition of storytelling alive to maintain our culture, claiming a non-physical space of our own. This oral tradition, also a liminal space, seeds my work. I'm interested in an enigmatic nature of forms that exist simultaneously private and public, between safety and chance, between spiritual and natural. These in-between places reflect the complicated nature of understanding the self and each other. I collaborate with performers, lecturers, and school children to activate my public sculptures. The content of my sculptures may transform depending on who experiences them and their perception, which is what happens to legends as they're handed down through the oral tradition. I want to encourage viewers to relate to my work through their own physical interaction. I make environments that direct viewers to become participants, and I believe people listen better when they're included in the process of discovery. And I founded a nonprofit named Black Lunch Table with SAIC Assistant Professor Gina Valentine. We met in 2005 at Skowhegan, where we collaborated on the first staging of the Black Lunch Table. We both had minimal exposure to Black visual artists as students, and we wanted to leave a legacy of access by building a Black Lunch Table archive. The project has existed in a number of forms, including salons and co-teaching workshops, social meetups, roundtables, and Wikipedia editathons. There's a critical need for a systematic reassessment and conceptualization of authorship, archives, and access to information. Black Lunch Table, or the BLT as we call it, addresses these goals. BLT mobilizes a democratic writing of cultural history through radical reimagining of digital authorship and archiving of contemporary art history as a performative communal process. This project empowers marginalized voices to write the record by recording, transcribing, archiving, and publishing their own stories. The organization accomplishes this goal through production of discursive spaces, both physically and digitally, where artists and local community members engage in dialogue on a variety of critical issues, which are digitized and presented in interactive archive. The integration of BLT's unique collection of vernacular histories and archive materials into syllabi, research journals, Wikipedia entries, podcasts, art installations, radio stories, and popular discourse further authenticates Black experiences by making them part of our shared canonical historical record. The archive is also unique and innovative fusion of linked open data principles, network-based interfaces, and analysis, and community-generated content and curation. Much like its creation of physical spaces that foster community and generate critical dialogue, BLT creates a digital space for art, Black studies, and social justice issues. And I'll leave with this rather preachy statement. Anything worth having is going to take energy, intention, and collaboration. And if I choose not to do that work, that's on me. I'm not obligated to be responsible. I don't have to be human. It's my privilege to be possessed as an artist. This energy and intention is not always comfy. It's sometimes heavy and feels hopeless, but it does teach me to be adaptable and flexible. And if I do want something, I have to face toward it. And sometimes I have to fight for it. And I need collaborators to help me keep my head up. I need to speak up when I can and accept the process with love while I keep my eye on the prize.
Heather, thank you so much. I think you used the word possessed, and I'm not sure if I misheard that, but I noted you did. I noted that in thinking about how Baldwin invoked that, and maybe that's something we can come back to for everybody. Marshall, you want to jump in?
Thank you. Wow, that's a lot to unpack. It's just great getting such intellectual food. Just eating the full meal that Mr. Baldwin gave us. I also want to just start off by saying that photo was really nice. It really captured his style, captured his sense of fashion. And if any younger students out there are wondering why he was holding a cigarette, it was just something that was very, very popular during that time. It's not quite looked the same way now, but that goes to show how we evolve. Also, it's kind of interesting, this was recorded May 21st of 1963, the very same year that I was born. Short days after this was done, Baldwin had his famous meeting with Attorney General Bobby Kennedy, where he invited Lena Horne and Harry Belafonte. And I mention that because if Regina King and Kim Powers are listening, that could be their next movie. They just did a great film, One Night in Miami. To distill a lot of good stuff that he gave us. He talked about artists having the responsibility to help see reality. And I was always taught that it's the artist's job, the artist's function to take care and hold it up to society. And he kind of says the same thing, not exactly with the same words. I love when he talks about self-expression, but to understand who self is. and he grappled with that. He grappled knowing he is a man, but is surrounded by society and a government and institutions that don't treat him as a man, which is why he spent time in France. He also talked about 50 years into the century, I think he said, and dogs turned on our children. And he also talked about how we need to be able to face reality, show what we see as art. That, I believe, is our moral responsibility. And I believe he was trying to disregard the false narrative. Gave several examples of the founding of this country. But then he said we have to be careful, as Fred earlier pointed out, that it could lead to Germany. And we might say to ourselves, well, that's here. But just yesterday, a 9-year-old child handcuffed in the back seat of a Rochester police car was tased. Our government, the new administration, is pouring countless resources to find the parents of 600 orphan beings that have our hand, the government of America. I could go on and on. I'll mention Tamir Rice, another child, planted a toy gun, is not here right now. His words that he was talking about in terms of us being able to truth still this day. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Marshall. Thanks so much for that. Jo-El, you are up. We're just, let's see. Hi.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I am a painter. I grew up in a African-American Pentecostal church. I went there for maybe 20-something years. I'm no longer a Christian, but I have taken a lot of those principles that Christ taught us, teaches in the Bible, and apply them to my work. Currently, I'm working on a series called Filthy Lucre, which is about mass incarceration, comparing it with the church in America. In my view, they're the same thing. They're both profit-driven and targeting people of color. But I won't go into that. I want to talk about James Baldwin. I just want to give you a little bit about myself, a little information about myself, so you know who I am to people who don't know me. It was very interesting that he said the moral responsibility of artists is someone who helps you see reality again. That stuck with me. I said, again, wow, that's interesting. Again. And I think that he talks about we as artists, maybe not dedicate our whole entire life about moral issues. I mean, unless that's what you do. But I think he's saying that in the time frame that we're in now, let's say 2021, or even several years before and several years after, what's going on in America that is immoral has to change, or in the world. And to me right now, it's the Black Lives Matter movement. We all know what it's about, and I think that we as artists, a lot of I live in Newark, and a lot of African American artists here in this area are great when it comes to Black Lives Matter art. Awesome, awesome, awesome. I think that what's needed is allies. Just a quick example, Portland, Oregon, I think they're 77 to 78% Caucasian, white Americans, and for over 100 days, they protested in Portland regarding the Black Lives Matter movement. They protested the whole movement. They were allies to the movement. That's was very interesting to me, especially when Baldwin said, "Help you see reality again." I saw it. I saw reality again, and I saw that the Black Lives Matter movement need allies, need Caucasian allies, need white allies, if I could say that. And what I mean by that, I mean artists, white artists. I don't see much art from white artists about Black Lives Matters. I don't know if it's something that they don't want to tackle, but it's part of our timeline, right? Our history. So to bring forward, to propel, or to make Black Lives Matter bigger and hopefully abolish this whole thing about police officers killing us, we need allies. And I think that James Baldwin is telling us that it's our responsibility at this time frame, again, not necessarily our whole life work, but just this time frame to talk about what's going on in our country and to make it a better country. We all have African-American friends, we love them dearly, but there are people who don't have African-American friends. They don't know any Black folks, you know, but with art, we could reach those folks. We could tell them the story, because some don't want to hear it, but I believe the art opened doors. And I believe that that's what Baldwin was talking about. And some of his awesome lecture that I've heard many times ever since you sent it to me. So great. So that's my introduction.
Well, that's great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. It's really wonderful to hear from everybody. It's a great way to kind of start this conversation. So I'll just preface before I offer a couple questions and reflections, just for the audience, don't. Feel free to start putting in questions now, in case, if you have them and want to just put them in. We're probably not going to get to it for a little bit, but feel free to start, populating that the Q&A chat if you want, and then we will dig into that just in a little bit. So I was going to ask something more general, maybe even something I would have posed to my colleagues in a seminar or something, which is like, how do you understand Baldwin's central question or the central task of the moral responsibility of the artist? But it's a good question, sort of unpacking exactly what Baldwin's trying to get at. But I want to ask something more specific. And maybe more personal. And some of you have touched on this already, so I hope it's not too redundant, but I'm wondering, what part of Baldwin's talk surprised you, or if not surprised, what resonated the most powerfully, and why? And there's so many amazing moments throughout that talk, and I think different anecdotes or images or different areas, I think, touch each of us maybe differently. So I'm wondering what resonated or surprised you.
Mark, I can start. What really struck me was you could replace the word Negro with Black, and everything that he said in 1963 we're still dealing with in 2021. Some of the scenarios have been tweaked slightly, but every critique that he offered, we're still debating now. So that speaks to his vision, his ability to see to the heart of things. And it also speaks to the denial that he critiqued, that we're still not telling the truth about what this country is and has been historically.
Yeah, it's it's uncanny. I mean, as you were describing this, and actually that the same thought occurred to me. It's uncanny how it's something I tried to touch on when I was doing a little introduction, that quote, and there's so many quotes that feel like they are, on the one hand, it's prophetic, but it's devastating, right? Because that's what I meant by like puncturing a hole in time, or we're somehow we're exactly in that moment. I mean, obviously some things are different, but that similar sense resonated with me too. Yeah.
You can also read the works of Frederick Douglass and get something very, he's painting up very similar ideas. I guess the fact that as a result of movement and so forth, we would think that we would be further along the case. And in fact, in a lot of ways, because racism is invisible, there aren't visible chains, they're not its only signs, it becomes harder to discern. I think there is a racial awakening that's happening now. So hopefully we can get allies. To answer your question, Mark, for me, and I'm going to use the term, it may insult some people, but it's for a reason. And that was for white people to ask they needed a nigger. And they immediately said, I'm not one, I'm a Negro. That's a stunning question. I can't answer because I'm not white, but big question. Why is there such fear in making the races equitable? Resistance, strong resistance.
Indeed, yeah. I mean, that is a powerful question. Let's come back to that. I want maybe the audience can weigh into that and lean into that. Thank you, Marshall.
I think one of the things, I don't think that it's a surprise really, or I don't know, it just feels familiar going back to this talk every now and then. But the ideas around empathy and change, I think, are kind of a theme for me this semester. Thinking about the, I guess, collaboration between, Europeans and artists at that time, Black artists in particular, but also thinking about what acceptance means and how, an artist's role, whether they, I think, are, whether they plan to or not, is one, to speak about responsibility and to show a mirror to the world, and also to speak from themselves and thinking about what he said about, whether you like it or not, what you invent says more about you than anything else. I love those quotes from this piece.
Thanks, Heather. And I'm making it, if I forget to come back to this, someone remind me, because I want to come back to this analogy, this metaphor, which there's so much loaded into it. It's an old idea that art is a mirror to society, and there's a whole hinge there in terms of abdicating responsibility within that model, but also in the way that Baldwin talks about it, where there's invariably or at the core, the artwork always sort of reflects back all the good and the bad and like what's really there. So it is a mirror, but then it's also, there's also a way in which you can, the artist cannot take responsibility, so to speak. But anyway, I want to come back to that. But Jo-El, I just wanted to, I don't know if no pressure if you wanted to respond to that first question or not, but
No, no. I'm not much of a talker. He talked about the moral leaders of the free world, like America, right? It's supposed to be the moral leaders of the free world. This was very interesting that he was saying that back then, and they still feel, well, we as Americans still feel the same way. However, we still have issues that have to be addressed. Besides killing our own citizens by our citizens, as well as caging up, people who want to come to our country, as well as killing people who are in death row. I mean, there's so many issues that we go tackle as artists, but to say that we're the moral leader of the free world, I have to question that. Many times, even the insurrection that happened last month, it just so many things that we as artists, we have so much to choose from as far as what to talk about, and it's hard to pick a cause. But to me, the most important one right now is our citizens being killed by our citizens. Right? You're killing your own citizen just because you're afraid of them or you don't know anything about them, just because the skin is a different shade than yours. That has to be addressed if we, as Americans, going to go forward and be exceptional. I'm talking like a politician, but that's what they talk. That's how they talk. But we as artists we're the ones that pushing the cart forward, or we need change, and they know that, and I think that's why they're scared of us. We as dancers, I've seen Ailey, many pieces of Ailey that talks about racial injustices and sculptures. I mean, theater. I mean, everything that we as creators create is a reflection of our country or our societies. Let me just think bigger.
Thanks, Jo-El. I want to, a couple of the things that were touched on, and perhaps this is also maybe, I don't know, it might be forced, but maybe a way to segue or to touch on this idea of the mirror to society, of art being a mirror to society, is something that I've been, it's poorly worded on my part, but I've been thinking about this idea, inspired by Baldwin, and I've been thinking about it in other ways, of what I'm going to call radical vulnerability. And Baldwin calls on the artist, and as much as Baldwin calls on the citizen, to have to reckon with reality, right? And he talks about closing this gap, this ever indivisible gap between what one merely sees. And right, there's that moment where he's like, the apple's red, but we have to move beyond the surface of things. So he talks about closing this gap between what one merely sees and what's really there at the deepest level. And that this is what artists do, right? And that one has to close this gap, even if it threatens you, even if it could annihilate the self or one's sense of themselves. For example, one's self-perception that they're good, that they're innocent, that they're not implicated, right? And so for Baldwin, I think the artwork exposes something profoundly uncomfortable to society, right? And this is that point where he talks about the artwork as an attack, right? Or it attacks the assumptions of society, right? It doesn't, in its best vision or iterate or manifestation, it challenges the what we take for granted. But he says it also exposes something to and about the artist, and this is that point where Baldwin talks about, the fact that what you invent exposes more or says more about you than it can possibly say about anyone else. And so anyway, that was long-winded, but my question is this, have any of you experienced what I'm calling radical vulnerability? Have any of you another way to put it is, have any of you wrestled with things that have come out of your work or come out of your practice that have confronted something in yourself, maybe that you didn't want to see, or that you had to contend with? Or another way to think about it is, have you had to confront something through someone else's artwork? You know, a piece that just made you look at yourself differently, or challenge something so deep in your beliefs. I hope that wasn't, I feel like I'm sorry that was so long-winded, but I was trying to pack in a bunch of different ideas in there. I can read those short questions again if that's helpful. I don't know.
I mean, I'm not sure if anybody else wants to answer this, but I love this idea of radical vulnerability. I think, you know, maybe not answering you too directly, but I think about it a lot in the classroom when, you know, you begin to accept the fact that you can't know everything. And like, how do I stay okay with not knowing the answers there? What are the stories that I have the right to tell through my artwork? How do I pose a question through my artwork that inspires folks to actually, you know, carry forward or discuss, you know? Gayatri Spivak talked a lot about radical vulnerability with the idea of like becoming uncomfortable, accepting trauma, you know, being wrong, change, again, change. I love change right now. So like figuring out what is this work about really, you know, what are my blind spots? What are my boundaries for participation? You know, I make participatory work a lot. So, you know, what is okay and what is not okay as far as when a person engages, plays with, changes, vandalizes, you know? Things that have inspired me is like, you know, being here, you know, maintaining work in the undercommons, as Fred Moten puts it, or like the margins, as Bell Hooks puts it. Thinking about Octavia Butler a lot with empathy and change, and thinking about radically vulnerable artists like David Hammons with his Concerto in Blue, or Carrie Mae Weems, like the Plantation Projects or the Kitchen Table series, and even like Spike Lee's Do the Right Thing.
Thank you. Thank you.
I can address something in a real small way. I'm getting a sign about my internet connection. I don't know what's going on. My apologies. But really briefly, I'm a director, a theater and producer. So in the 90s, I was at Madison Square Garden, and we produced a big musical, Christmas Carol. And it was white, Angela, Roger Daltrey. So I also produced and directed production at the New Brunswick Performing Arts Center before the whole industry. I cast a Black Scrooge. There's a scene where the older Scrooge, the red, and I cast a Black person to play his father, and I didn't pay any attention with Angela and the other people that Scrooge and how he lived his life. No way.
I'm so sorry to interrupt, but it's getting pretty broken up. Is that just me, or is that for other folks too? So I mean, okay. Maybe I'm wondering from Amanda if maybe, is there some advice, like should Marshall maybe just try to, I hate to do this, but maybe if you turn off your video, do you think the bandwidth would be better for audio?
We don't have enough time. I'll type the answer.
Okay, I was going to say that would be my suggestion, but typing would work too. Thanks.
Okay, so sorry to interrupt you.
Okay. I'm letting go.
Can I pick it up, Frederick, or you want to go?
You can go ahead, Jo-El.
I have a piece that I created called "The Kiss" at the 16th Street Baptist Church. When I was in the religion, I don't want to call it a cult, the Christian religion, there were two women in our church that never married, and maybe for 20 years, they would pray over them and why don't we get married and the whole story. I later found out, talking to one of them, I ran into them, and they told me that they were lesbian lovers. And I said, really, for 20 years? I would never have known that. So I wanted to create a piece, be radical about it, about two women, especially African-American women, kissing on a pew in front of a stained glass window of Jesus Christ. To be radical about it and to put that in people's faces that love between same-sex couples cannot exist in a Christian church. Now, that's their belief. And, when you go into a Christian church, that's what they believe. You either believe it or you don't. But that's what they stand for. And, well, this particular church, the non-denominational evangelical church that I belong to. So that was a very interesting time for me. I wrestled with that subject for a long time. A couple of reasons. Do I want to expose the church to this? One, two, what about me? What people are saying about me. Why didn't I do something about it at the time? Well, I didn't know, but I wanted to talk about love and people love in the church. They love you as long as you're straight, which is nothing wrong with that. I mean, that's life. The church that I belong to, they don't, as long as you abide by the Christian values, you're loved. They just didn't allow two people to love each other because they just love each other. So that was very difficult for me to present in a painting form. But I had to tell the story because that's the story I knew about that particular two individuals. And that's just my experience with being vulnerable with the subject, being radical as well. And the piece can be seen at the Newark Museum. I had to put that plug in. Sorry.
That's okay. And I was just gonna ask a follow-up question about visibility and the community, both the couple but also the larger community that that is part of this couple's life or part of their the social sphere, obviously, in the church. Did you how to what extent were they exposed to that work, or did you obviously there was a lot of questioning about if you could show it or how you could show it, but
they left the church by that time because it was the same reason I left. I left for that reason besides other stuff. They left the church because they couldn't love each other, and the pastor was like, well, you knew our tenets of faith before you joined, and one of them was that no to homosexuality or lesbianism or love. I call it love. So they liked the painting. I know the person that I bought it off from loved the painting, and I had the first time I showed it, a young lady came up to me and said, I want that piece. That's me and my wife. She's like, I'm a usher at the church, and she's, maybe in the choir, and we've been in love for the past 15 years. I want that piece. And she wanted to buy it on the spot. I got really nervous because, who does that offer right from the start is can be nerve-wracking because I think I had something. I'm not sure if it was going to have legs, so I told her no. But I'm so happy that, and I did that painting way before the Supreme Court decision, to accept people could marry same-sex marriage. So it was a radical. It was a time of of I didn't care anymore. You know, love is love. Let's love each other. So I hope that answers your question, but
Yeah, and I really appreciate that. And I think, you know, in a way I was thinking about Heather, one of the responses Heather gave a little bit earlier in terms of these participatory artworks in which you don't always know the answer, and there's so much you don't know, and because it's living and in the social, and it's directly involving people. You know, and both of your examples sort of speak to different aspects of that. That, you know, there is always a process of questioning and not knowing the reception, but also, you know, trying to speak truth, or trying to do, you know, trying to make the work that you I feel like has to be made, and the statement that has to be made. Statement's probably not the right word, but anyway, you know, to a certain extent, you don't know what the reaction is going to be, but you have to be kind of brave enough to put it out there. You have to be willing to. There's a risk there, right? I have some more questions, but there's some really interesting inquiries that have come in through the Q&A. So maybe I can weave back and forth between them. But one of the participants writes, how does self-identity play into your social responsibility as an artist? And does that impact your response or direction in art? And it's such a core question, you know. Someone want to take a?
Can I just say real quick before everybody? You can't hide as an artist. You can't hide who you are, right? So you have to know who you are and be secure at who you are. I always tell younger artists, I could tell everything about you in your artwork because your soul doesn't lie. And when it comes forward into your artwork, I like to see that. I like to see a dancer dancing and I see their soul. Same thing as piece of artwork. You know, you just look at it and you see the artist's soul. And that doesn't happen by you hiding and not knowing who you are as a person. Just a quick statement.
Thank you.
I mean, I'll talk about it in an arts ed frame. I think it's really important to be explicit about who you are, who you see yourself to be, that you're not coming into the classroom as a blank canvas, that you're clear about your positionality, but in that you also make room for the validity of other positionalities and identities. So if you can strike that balance, it's really challenging, then you can really be your affirmed authentic self, and you can create spaces for other people to be their affirmed authentic selves as you engage in these artistic processes.
And I'll just add that for us in the theater world, students truthful in their behavior, and when they're not. Acting really being another character is not putting on a mask, it's taking off a mask. So for artists and actors, you have got to deal with authenticity of who you are. Small.
I caught the first half of that, but not the second half. Were you saying something about like there's an authenticity that's required, or a certain like knowing of oneself if you're going to do acting right? Was it somewhere along those lines, or?
Yeah. Yep.
I'm so sorry, you're frozen again. Maybe try typing it in. It's so tragic when we're at the mercy of the internet
I think just to maybe dovetail on that question a little bit, I think that honestly, whether or not an artist is intentional about or self-aware, self-conscious about identity of the self, I feel like it does play into an impact of how it's read regardless. So I would totally agree with what Frederick said. And I also would say whether or not somebody is responsible enough to get to know themselves, it's going to be part of that narrative as to how we read it and how it's received in the world and how it impacts the world. So yes, I think I do have a civic responsibility, but I also feel like I don't really have a choice.
Yeah.
And that's a really important distinction, whether I mean, sometimes with my students, for example, they'll say, I'm not really interested in politics. I don't, and I always try to say, well, you can't escape the political. You can't escape ideology. It's sort of, everything's political. It's sort of there, whether you want to address, whether you want to understand your own relationship and your own implication within it, or what you've made or what you've said, intentionally or not. So I think it's interesting, the sense that there are those who feel that there isn't a choice, and there are people who feel compelled and really earnestly, and there are people who it's never been a choice, right? And so I think that it's incisive, that difference. Look, it looks like maybe Marshall is trying to log back on, so hopefully he can join us soon. There's another question here. I want to be sensitive of time too. I know it's about an hour and 45 minutes in, so I'll start moving towards some closure here, even though there's so much to talk about. I feel like we're skimming the surface necessarily, because there's so much to chew on. But another participant writes, I think one of Baldwin's points was how we as artists can build narratives, sometimes out of nothing and sometimes not aware of the legacies we are creating. Whether or not Richard III was a villain, he is now due to Shakespeare. How do we approach this minefield? For instance, we celebrate Hamilton as a show, but how do we square the possible shift of his legacy later?
Hmm.
I mean, this is a variation on that. I'm going back to what Jo-El shared about the artwork that he did in the South in the church, which really made me think about like what narratives are permissible and which ones are centered and which ones are marginalized. I think a key is that we have a multiplicity of narratives. Like that's the first thing, that there's no center guiding narrative, overarching narrative, that we have variety, and there's a sense of like equitable treatment of narratives as a starting point. And maybe that can get us towards answering some of these questions about how we build them. Is we make space for them because they exist, and some of them just don't ever get a place or a space, like Heather was talking about before.
And also, dovetailing on Frederick again, I think also like history isn't static. You know what I mean? So like as we move forward in time, we're constantly reinterpreting and recontextualizing. I mean, that's part of our responsibility too, I think, is considering the context in which the author of that history wrote it and how, that bias has like shifted the narrative. And so I think that's another way that artists are able to kind of adapt and readapt constantly. It doesn't ever have a conclusion, it's a process.
Yeah, and also to add on to that, specifically with respect to Hamilton, the narrative of Hamilton, according to Lin-Manuel Miranda, was to show that the founding fathers were immigrants, and to cast the show with hip hop music and black and brown people. He's showing that they contribute to the success of America as well. It's dangerous when we expect people of color to have narratives that can answer everything for everybody, because he was criticized because, you know, slavery is not mentioned. The genocide of the indigenous people was not mentioned, but that wasn't his play. And we have to be careful. No one talks about Tennessee Williams and writing about the effects of his mother in all of his plays. We just say he's a great writer. So we have to recognize that we're not a monolith. There's all different types of stories that are being told, and just sit back, relax, read, watch, and observe.
That's such a great point. And, you know, people talk about what quote unquote Black art is, you know, it's like, what does that even mean? You know, because I make an abstraction, you know, why aren't you like judging all of these like big public sculptors in the same way, who have like the white male privilege, you know?
Yeah.
Mark, can I say that I'm probably the only person in the history of mankind that did not have $1,500 to watch Hamilton. So
Disney Plus.
You know, there's nothing like seeing it on Broadway. I just couldn't. I didn't have the 1,500. Not on the artist's salary. Or
No, but you could. It's on Disney Plus now. So
I know. I just wanted to see it.
I don't have it either. I saw it on Disney Plus.
Okay. It's just the bravery, his bravery at the time, right before all this stuff came out about Hamilton. Going back to your question about vulnerability, right? Who showed? I mean, I know I saw a documentary about him writing the play or the musical, and he mentioned it to President Obama. Hey, I'm writing a story about a play about Hamilton, and they looked at him like he was crazy. Like, what? That doesn't sound exciting. But he was brave to tackle such, you know, a subject like that, knowing everything that the history of this man. So just, you know, he was vulnerable and radical. Just going back to your first question, Mark.
And just really quickly, I'll add on to his bravery is that he humbly accepted the criticism. Did not get defensive, just nodded his head, you have a valid point. And just kept on working on the next project, which also takes courage.
One of the things, I know we didn't have time to listen to the Baldwin's Q&A and his own talk in '63, but for those of you who found this talk really compelling, I would implore you to go find that link. It's really easy on the internet, on YouTube, and listen to that last 20 minutes that we didn't get to listen to. And one of the questions in there, and this relates to this thing that came up that a few of you addressed in terms of process, right? And that history isn't static, and it certainly isn't. Is that it's not so much, I think, that Baldwin's saying you have to have like the right position, like this is the right true position, and it's sort of fixed, and this is the ethical thing, and it's just this sort of fixed static injunction. And one of there's someone who asked a question, a kind of an interesting but annoying question in his talk, and said, you know, the responsibility of the artist is to reproduce himself. And Baldwin said, no, the point is to recreate oneself. The point of the artist is to recreate oneself and then help others recreate themselves. And so that would be another layer, another level of the vision, but also the responsibility, or maybe even the possibility of what artists do and what we do or what we hope to do. And I think that in there is that sense of becoming in multiplicity and process, because every moment, I mean, you know, Friedrich, we started this with the kind of uncanny stasis in the way like so many things haven't changed, and it's, you know, we're very much in the same place. But of course, a lot of things, everything is always transforming and changing too. Everything is always in flux. And so I think that injunction, that in a way, that kind of humble injunction of Baldwin is also another point of vulnerability, you know, that you recreate oneself, that it's not just like, oh, this is the right way, or this is what blackness is, or this is what justice is, but this is what we hope it is. This is what we hope becoming fully human is. And that's always, I think that's always shifting. I mean, I think that even, you know, even the language that he uses, you know, centering the man as the kind of universal, whatever, he's a product of his time, but we're always learning as human beings, and we're always, you know, I think that we're always tasked to sort of challenge what we think of as ethical and what we think of as right. And so I think that was a little rambly, but I love these threads of the kind of instability that that a lot of you touched on, you know.
Just really quickly, Mark, if my memory serves me correctly, when he mentioned that trick is to recreate oneself, didn't the audience erupt in applause?
Yes.
Yeah.
They heard it, they loved it.
That was a nice moment, yeah.
Look, I want to be sensitive of time. I feel like we're actually getting on a roll. We've been on a roll, but I'm so loving this. Should we wrap it up? Do you think? There's 62 folks who are sticking with us, but do you want to wrap it up, or do you want to do one more question? How are we feeling?
Another question.
Yeah.
Let's give the 62 people their money's worth.
Okay, we'll do one more. Let's try to wrap it up. Let's try to keep it concise, and then we will say our goodbyes. Let me see. What do we have here? Here's a question about class. Do you feel the issue of class causes conflict between the artist and the general audience when a moral act is being sought after? If so, how? If not, why? I'll read that again. Do you feel the issue of class causes conflict between the artist and the general audience when a moral act is being sought after? If so, not why?
Sorry. I think like everybody should be self-aware, not just artists. And if you're self-aware, then you also should be aware of whatever ethical, class, demographic, whatever kinds of issues and differences that exist between you and the community that you're trying to speak to, I guess. I never want to ever be one of the public artists that swoops into a community and like wants to solve any problems that I have nothing to do with and then leave, you know? I want to have a conversation. I want to be a catalyst, but I don't claim to, make change in that kind of way as my moral responsibility. I don't know.
I think an artist like Banksy gets a lot of slack for his message or his messaging. And I think that has to do with class, right? Although I'm not talking about money, because of course I'm sure he's well off, but I'm talking about the way he's doing it. His approach of graffiti has always been known as a street type of art and a different class of artists. Let's be real, right? Let's keep it real. So because he's doing it that way, sometimes I think his message, it gets lost. And his messages are just as strong as, I don't want to say Baldwin, but you know, a great artist that's talking to the world about social issues. But a lot of people don't see it that way. We do, because we're artists and we love his art. Well, you know, we love art, period. But I don't think the general public sees him as we see him, as a valuable tool in changing the world.
If I'm understanding the question correctly, I'm not sure I am. but if I am, I think one of the things is, and because Heather hinted at this, is what happens when artists engage with communities, and what do they know about the communities that they're engaging with? And sometimes the communities are just an audience. I think very few artists have that sensibility to take the time to understand their audience and to pitch their conversation about their art in a way that the people listening to them can identify with. And so this idea of like being a facile communicator, there's your message, your artistic message, but then there's what happens between you and the audience, your artwork and the audience, and the triangulation of those three, and how much facility do you have in being flexible and talking about your art from multiple perspectives in different ways so that you can facilitate different people engaging with it. So it's less of a like, this is my art and either you get it or you don't. And if you don't, then it's because you're like not as sophisticated as me. That's like where the classism comes in. You're not as learned as me. You're not as hip as me, whatever. Yeah.
Thank you. I love it.
I was just going to say really quickly, the theater world's a little bit different because most of us are interpreting the work created by the writer. And typically the writer is really speaking from his authentic self. So if the subject matter does involve class, then, you know, he's going to, or she, or they will express that. So it's not that big of an issue in our field, unless they want to pursue commercial and are denying themselves, but still, it's really, really tough. You got to really write from your soul.
I mean, we could stay on for an hour, I think, more, because I was going to say to Marshall, I feel like, but I'm also wondering if like a performer is ever neutral in that way, you know? Like I can't help but think about, and maybe it's just because I'm an overthinker, but when I'm looking at a film or something, thinking about, I guess, backing out of the situation and thinking about the actor's embodiment of that character, interpretation, and I guess agency in that way, and whether or not the person who is written about has that kind of agency around their character. I don't know, it gets all complicated.
Yeah, it definitely does get complicated, and we're seeing more and more voices that are not just in terms of writing the piece, but directing and production design and all those other elements. A great example is Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, which is August Wilson play, but Denzel Washington produced it, George C. Wolfe directed it, and you know, costumes, everything were people of color. So you're really getting an authentic perspective. But I know someone very close to me that just auditioned for Madam, and ordinarily she would not do that, but she saw how to add humanity with this character. The character is a madam, but you know, there is someone that comes into her past who she actually loved, and she felt that she took the role, went on the audition, and you know, the agent was like, I know you question things like that, but that's why she went out for it. We don't know if she got it yet.
You know, maybe we should wrap it up. I have more questions. I have a lot more questions. There's a couple more. I think there's one more in the chat, but you know, this has been a 2-hour thing, and I do want to be respectful of your time and the participants' time. But I would just, in closing, I would just say, and Heather just said this, but this is just the beginning of a conversation. We can almost have a series of just reflecting on this sort of ever urgent, ever unfolding theme, and the sort of the prompt that Baldwin poses for us, and it's just so rich. And I've loved our conversation, and I want to keep listening to this talk and thinking about it, and editing my transcript. But I just want to thank you so much, all the panelists. I want to thank Amanda again and Cassandra for their work and including us. And I just want to thank all the participants who stayed up late and joined us, and for your questions and reflections. And I hope that there'll be some iteration of this and an extension of this conversation in your own lives and classrooms and studios. So thanks so much again. Please check out the Zimmerli online, check out the Zimmerli when it reopens, and please follow the Windows of Understanding and see this sort of amazing public work that's happening. And there's a lot of other great programming. So thank you all so much again. Really enjoy this. I'm really grateful.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Take care.
Nice to see you.
Bye-bye.